Professor Richard Gill, Professor Nina Modi, Professor Peter Green, Professor Alan Wayne Jones, all expressing their doubt in the verdict. Well, now, guess who we have got on board? Yes, Professor Peter Andre. Well, there we go. I want to talk about a letter from John Gibbs. It was sort of half interesting before, but it ended quite abruptly. Well, we're going to go through it. It's not a letter, it's an email from John Gibbs, one of the gang of four, to his dear friend Ravi. Sorry, not a gang of four, a gang of seven. And the date of the email is 24th of February 2017. Oh, it's like mid-90s. Working away tirelessly. Emotions running high. So this is like 2 months just before. It's when so the grievance process has been completed. I think that's where we are. Ravi is. They're all having to sign their letters of. It's around the time of them signing their letters of apology, and Ravi and Steve having to attend a mediation. I don't think Steve ever goes to mediation. I think Ravi only attends once, and they're trying to. It's around the time they're trying to push for a police investigation. So it's post the Jane Horden, the second external review. Okay. Hi Ravi. Been a long day. Stuck in A&E most of the time, apart from popping to and from the wards to check how things were getting on and seeing the paediatric obstetrics ward urgents at lunchtime. Anyway, all quiet now. Managed to get to see Ian this evening, and it was just Ian. Although he said this was to discuss my review of non-fatal collapses, this was only covered in passing. The areas discussed were the review Anne Martin and I undertook. Ian didn't tell me how many patients had been identified, but said there were quite a few. I don't think he was hiding anything. He didn't have the data with him, but he's promised to send me the info. Apparently Lucy did not feature prominently in the staff correlation analysis of those collapses. I'm keen to see the data, because if there really were many such cases, then I'm not sure that these were the specific ones that were highlighted as being unusual or unexpected. And if the staff analysis was undertaken for too many of the collapses, then that might have obscured an unusual correlation between certain staff and those unusual / unexpected collapses. But let's wait until we've seen the data. Ian agreed that I could share it with all of us, the gang of seven, I take it. In relation to that review, I mentioned that it had been disappointing that we'd not been able to see the results of the analysis, and whilst on that theme, I said we'd all been surprised and very disappointed that the board had come to its decision without us actually seeing the two review reports. Ian admitted that there were lessons to be learnt about communication during the whole of this investigation, and he also included keeping parents more closely informed and updated. Apparently this will be considered during a major debrief to take place at some stage. Ian felt that he and Stephen Cross had made our concerns clear to the coroner. As Tony Chambers had said in his letter to each of us, our letter which we gave our view that the deaths and non-fatal collapses had not been adequately addressed through the two reviews so far, and that we felt some of these were unnatural, was given to the coroner. Also, Ian and Stephen Cross discussed our concern that one particular nurse featured more often than any other nurse in the resuscitation's immediate care of the deaths and collapses. Also, as we already knew, the coroner has the full college review, where our concerns are again covered, and also Dr. Horden's review. The discussion was held both with the soon-to-retire coroner Nicholas Reinberg and the deputy Cheshire coroner Alan Moore, who is to take over from the current coroner next month. Like Reinberg, Moore's background is a lawyer. I feel it was useful for both to be informed together, because although Reinberg will not doubt want to maintain his professional integrity, I would worry that his decision over what action, if any, to take might to an extent be influenced by his imminent retirement, whereas the new coroner may have a different perspective at the start of his role as Cheshire coroner. The coroner told Ian that he would not expect to have to reopen inquests that have already been held, but that the forthcoming inquests, of which Ian thinks there are likely to be 3, although 2 of those are probably child O and P, would provide an opportunity to examine issues associated with the deaths. Ian does not know if the coroner, deputy coroner, are considering any other actions. Incidentally, these inquests never took place because of the criminal investigation. I'll continue. Ian explained that we can look at issues surrounding the deaths that Jane Horde and Nim have identified as unexplained when we meet next week. This is on Tuesday afternoon. But I think that you'll be back then, will you, Ravi? Ian asked me what I thought would be the end point of these reviews and further discussions, and whether we'd be able to draw things to a close and move on with implementing the recommendations from the college review in order to enhance the neonatal service. He didn't specify what level of unit this would be. I said that we are preparing letters to both Tony Chambers and Lucy. That's they're the apology letters, but this has been held up with the holidays, which Ian says he entirely understands. I also explained that a problem we, Gang of 7, have, and I said I thought this applied to all the consultant paediatricians, was that we remain somewhat suspicious of Lucy's involvement, but we don't know what she did, if anything, nor how she did it, and obviously we don't know that she actually did anything untoward. Even so, I made it clear that, unlike the impression given in the full version of the college review, that it was only after Steve's first review at the end of 2015 happened to highlight an association between Lucy and many of the sudden unexpected collapses that our suspicions over Lucy then became aroused. Each of us had already started to become worried about this association from our personal involvement in various episodes. Initially, we felt Lucy was just unlucky in happening to be involved in more of these infants than other nurses, but this association became steadily more worrying, especially with recurrent sudden collapses at night that stopped when Lucy was moved off nights, and then on one occasion that I'm aware of, when Lucy covered a stable infant during a colleague's coffee break, during which the infant unexpectedly collapsed. Ian again mentioned that Lucy, being a young single nurse, undertook more sessions than other nurses on the unit, and so would be expected to be associated with more events. But I countered that this was true, but her involvement still seemed to be unexpectedly frequent. I added that in any mediation with Lucy, it would be very difficult to know how to answer if Lucy, or the mediator with Lucy present, asked whether we still had suspicions about her, although I suggested that, like a politician, we could aim to resolutely refuse to answer the questions directly and instead talk about, oh my god, the arrogance of this man. And it stopped there. I'm just going to give a shout out to Truth Will Out 23, who pointed me in the direction of the James Hopkinson files witness statements. It's quite big, and we get to actually see the rest of this email. So they call me the milkman because I always deliver. I suggested that, like a politician, we could aim to resolutely refuse to answer the questions directly and instead talk about how the rise in mortality and the unexpected collapses is worrying and difficult to explain, and it's not clear what caused this despite the reviews. I said that although we didn't know that Letby had been the cause of unnatural collapses or deaths, we were still worried that this might be the case and that this problem could resurface at any stage in the future, either here or if Letby moved in another trust. So whilst we don't know if anything unnatural had happened, we've felt we had to do everything reasonable to find out. Ian assured me that the issues on the unit had led to a great deal of soul searching amongst the execs, and that for months our neonatal unit has been given priority at each and every weekly exec meeting. I also reminded Ian that most of the failings highlighted by the college review, lack of consultant, middle grade nursing staff, also applied to most other units, and so didn't adequately explain our increased mortality. Ian went back to the observation he'd made when we all met prior to the college review, that the workload intensity had increased significantly on our unit in the past 2 years, prior to the voluntary downgrading. Interestingly, without me needing to bring this up again, he said himself that he understood that we were also worried about the sudden, unexpected nature of many of the collapses. But he then added that perhaps when workload is high, sometimes early warning indicators aren't spotted, and so patients are more likely to then deteriorate, sometimes rapidly. That's a good point. Dr. Gibbs then went on to conclude, I feel that we've probably done all we can, and that it's not appropriate to consider whistleblowing to the police, to the media or police, particularly since it seems that the trust has informed the coroner, in fact 2 coroners, about our dark suspicions, and that's almost the same as telling the police. And we may have to accept that we are probably never going to get a clear answer to the cause of our increased neonatal mortality and non-fatal collapses, and insisting on pushing things further isn't likely to provide any better answers. Although the coroners or parents might decide to take things further, but it's not clear what they could do to clarify the situation. Amongst all of us, Steve might find it the most difficult not to press for further forensic style investigations, i.e. direct police involvement, because he's put so much effort into trying to resolve this issue and has been even more frustrated, humiliated and angered by Ian especially than the rest of us. Not that any of us have found this affair to be anything other than highly distressing. And there we have it. Now we know Steve's motives for pushing forward for this forensic review. So that is why we only got to see page 1 of that email. A couple of other interesting things in this Jane Tompkinson file. This is going to upset a lot of people. So let me get to my notes. It's the notes, man. 331. So Lucy had been arrested, and in 2018, so before her trial had even began, on the 4th of January 2021, a letter was sent to her. This is a bit sick. I do not consider it appropriate or necessary within this internal disciplinary hearing to determine whether or not I find the allegations of murder or attempted murder brought against you to be proven. That is for the criminal court to decide. However, in reaching my decision, I have taken into consideration that the burden of proof in a criminal case is far higher than in the case of an internal disciplinary hearing, and that even were you to be acquitted of these criminal charges, there would remain for the foreseeable future such a significant loss of trust and confidence in you as a neonatal nurse, both from the perception of the public, the trust and colleagues, that would make your position in the trust untenable. In addition, since being charged with these offences, I am also of the opinion that your continued employment represents a serious risk to the reputation of the trust as a responsible healthcare provider. I gave consideration to the possibility of retaining you in the employment of the trust until such a time as your case is heard. However, I do not believe that it is an appropriate use of public funds in light of the above findings, including the fact that I believe trust in you is irretrievably broken down. So she's not even before she's even been found guilty. Just the mere fact that the finger was pointed at her, her life was ruined, completely ruined. A couple of other interesting things in these. This is a Jane Tompkinson witness statement number 2 of, I think there's 4 or 5. There were some Datix reports. Now, there was a story in the Mail about astonishing revenge claim revealed how the nurse repeatedly raised alarms over doctors' blunders in the baby unit, and they show some Datixes, specifically one from the 24th of June. I think there were actually 2 made on the 24th of June about sudden acute collapse, not finding any sodium bicarbonate, and I don't know if it actually mentioned here, but those 2 Datexes were actually to do with child O and P, and there was another Datix on the indictment, on an indictment baby, and it was child A. And I just wanted to mention possible double standard. 105. So a Datix was reported in relation to child A on 9th of June, following an incident on the 8th of June. I exhibit this document as, and they give a link. It was reported that there was a sudden and unexpected deterioration and death of a patient on the neonatal unit after full resuscitation. And it goes on to say another Datex was received. They normally do 2 at a time, I think. Do a couple at a time. In relation to child A on the 29th of August 2015. for an incident on the 8th of June, it was noted that on reviewing the notes, the maintenance dose of caffeine was prescribed 12 hours after loading dose, rather than 24 hours after the loading dose, which is the usual case, and that baby A passed away 12 hours later. It was also noted that it was not clear from the notes if the medication was given early in error or because the baby was still having apneas for which this medication is the treatment. Within the description it was detailed, "I do not think this incident is responsible for the apnea and subsequent death which happened 12 hours later, as caffeine is in fact the treatment for that." It was noted that there needed to be a review of the incident in a neonatal review meeting and to disseminate information about documentation for reasons. The reporter listed as Murthy Salidi, and the employee involved was Melanie Taylor. Now, this wasn't really brought up in the trial. I'm not saying it has got anything to do with the death of the baby, but what I will say is that had this nurse's name not been Mel Taylor, but instead been a Ms. Letby, would we now be looking at another charge? I'm just saying, there's the double standards that were going on. There were some other interesting datixes, and it just sort of showed. Letby raised a few and showed a couple of other serious incidents, but it's quite interesting. That's about it for today.